Good evening and welcome to the Bat of Minerva. This is Peter Shea, host for the show. Mercifully behind the camera tonight, as usual. Tonight the Bat has flown across the country to Montclair, New Jersey, where I have the privilege of documenting one of the most important public philosophy efforts I know about, possibly one of the most important public philosophy efforts ever undertaken, the Philosophy for Children movement that started a little better than 30 years ago with Matthew Lipman's epical Harry Stottlemyre's discovery. This movement has continued, grown, expanded, is now taking root in different forms all over the world. And I have the privilege of being part of their archiving project, their oral history project, to visit with some of the people who have been central to Philosophy for Children in this 30-year history, to get a sense of how they've seen it as it has progressed. Tonight, it's my pleasure to talk to Dr. Phil Guin, who has been somebody I've kind of connected to off and on from the time I was trained years ago. And to kind of, well, we have connected from time to time, and I know some of what he's done. I haven't ever quite gotten the story. So tonight, it's my pleasure to kind of get a look from a long-time practitioner of Philosophy for Children of kind of how that's gone. Phil, can you say a little bit about, how you got into philosophy and then how you got into Philosophy for Children and stuff like that?
Sure, Peter. I suppose I could go back to when I was teaching philosophy at one of the state colleges in Massachusetts. And at that time, the courses and the curriculum, the way it was set up, kept me pretty much doing just 2 or 3 repetitive type courses, mostly in philosophy of education, history of education, which was still currently, at that time, it was still in the curriculum of many colleges. I don't think it is much anymore, but at that time it was. I received a invitation at some point to attend a seminar at Harvard University in Philosophy for Children that was being held by Matthew Lipman and Ann Sharp, who was the co-director. And I went to the seminar, not knowing much about what was going to happen. Anne had been a graduate student with me at the University of Massachusetts, so I knew her quite well at that time. I didn't know Lippmann at the time. Anyway, the seminar was mostly a number of presentations by people who themselves knew very little of Philosophy for Children, and most of them were presentations that were somewhat off the wall. They didn't seem to me to be particularly interesting or helpful. They seem to reflect the kinds of research that these people were doing, and so I just didn't feel that it was very germane to anything that I was particularly interested in. However, they did show a film of a teacher in Newark, New Jersey, a mathematics teacher. And she had read Littman's book, Harry Stonemeyer's Discovery, that you had mentioned earlier, Peter. And had contacted Matt and asked him how she should proceed to use that and utilize it in her mathematics course. She felt that the logic, which is the spine or the backbone of the novel, traditional logic for the most part, would be very good for her students. And so she entered into a discussion with Matt on this. And so the film that I saw was after some months that she had been in contact with Matt, and then utilizing their conversations in the classroom. And it was, to me, a real awakening to see the class that she had using the philosophy for children approach. Primarily the approach that depends on asking questions and getting responses from the children, and then building on those responses in a dialogical format. And I suppose that was the way that I got into philosophy for children, because, as I said before, I was getting a little bit bored with the 3 courses I was teaching at State College. And Matt and Ann offered me a opportunity to come to New Jersey and work with teachers in several of the school districts, and I accepted. So for a number of years I did just that. I trained teachers in philosophy for children in New Jersey. I don't know if that's what you need or not.
Well, I think it's very helpful. When was this seminar at Harvard, just to place things in time? Do you remember the year?
Oh, sure. That would have been about 1975, 76.
Yeah. So you connected about 3 years before I did. 3-4 years before I did. It was about 78 when I got trained, I think.
Right.
I think your experience of finding the talk about philosophy for children sort of tiresome, but the actual classroom samples electrifying is a pretty common one. I remember when I did work trying to get some folks at Metro State interested in supporting grant projects in the schools. As soon as I showed the video clip, I had it. But until then, it's just promises. Once I had the video clip, then it was there. I'd like to take the story back a little bit from where you began it and then forward. Can you say a little bit about what got you into philosophy in the first place? What sort of impulses or questions or experiences got you there?
Well, I had been in the service And I went to school on the GI Bill, University of Wisconsin. And after I graduated, I got a job. Well, actually, I did major in philosophy as an undergraduate. And I can't say that there was any particular impetus there. It was, I had taken a course in my junior year. The first philosophy course I had was in my junior year. And I was, at the time, undeclared major. I knew I had to find something. And the professor of that course, a man named Ramsberger, I just liked the man. I liked the way he did his course. I liked the kinds of attempts that he made to get our interest. And I think that possibly was the beginning of my interest in philosophy. It was then necessary to take quite a few courses, practically all the rest of my courses in philosophy, in order to get the necessary credit number to graduate, get the major. But after getting the degree, I spent a number of years. I worked in an industrial situation. I was a buyer, purchasing agent for a chemical and laboratory apparatus company in Denver, Colorado. Again, I think it was kind of a dead-end type of profession. I didn't see it going anywhere except buying more chemicals and more laboratory apparatus. But I did take some courses at night at the University of Denver, and at some point I applied to their graduate program. They had a master's program in philosophy, and I entered that master's program, and my mentor there was a man named Wolfgang Yergrau, who had been a graduate assistant to Schrodinger, University of Berlin. Those days, I guess, if you majored in philosophy, you also majored in science. At least in many cases that was the case. And Yergrau, again, was very instrumental in raising my interest, keeping it going in philosophy. And so I took a master's degree there at Denver. Later on, I did get into a graduate program at University of Massachusetts. That's where I met Ann Sharp.
Well, I guess I'm interested in what you were trying, when you started teaching philosophy, what did you see yourself as trying to do for people? What was your idea of what teaching was all about?
Well, as I look back on it, the enterprise seems, in retrospect, rather benighted. I started teaching philosophy at a time when there was a tremendous emphasis on Anglo-American philosophy, analysis, conceptual analysis, heavy emphasis on empiricism, heavy emphasis on minutia, And I guess I felt at that time that I should fall into that pattern. As I look back again, here I was in a state college. In fact, the first 2 years I taught, I had nothing but young ladies as students. And it only became a coeducational institute after, I think, the third year that I was there. So my guess is that for the most part, my teaching was inadequate to the type of school and the kind of students that I had. If I had it to do over, I would not go that way.
So it was sort of too detailed and picky and microscopic when people were coming in asking about the meaning of life and, premarital sex and abortion and, what do I do about global poverty,
Actually, precisely those questions started to emerge about that time. And I did get, towards the end of my teaching in the State College, I did get better and into more topical.
Yeah. So for when you started doing philosophy for children, the idea was you were in another kind of dead end. That is, you were teaching. You were teaching a round of courses that never changed, and you wanted something different. This was an opportunity to do something different.
Yeah, when the opportunity came, when Matt Lippman asked me if I wanted to come to New Jersey and train some teachers, I thought here's a good chance to do something different, and I've never regretted that move.
So how was that? I mean, you're now you still are coming out of an analytic tradition. You've studied with somebody who was sort of in that realm between philosophy and science, and now you're coming to teach teachers in the New Jersey school system. Mm-hmm. How did that work out? I mean, how was the beginning of that process for you?
Well, I don't know. It seems to me there's one consequence of studying philosophy is that it makes you, if you read enough of it, it makes you more flexible.
Yeah, right.
I mean, for example, when I first started teaching, political and social philosophy was considered really a very minor concern of real philosophers.
Yeah, right.
And that's completely changed today. I mean, political and social issues are right at the top of, I mean, you see the kind of work that Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum and some of these people have done, and the changes that have been made in economics, and especially in the third world, and changing the pattern of how we are encouraging a change in the pattern of how we look at what welfare is and what can be done with people that are disadvantaged. And to me, that's some very encouraging in the way, in the patterns of the way that philosophy is going. That it now seems to have more and more impact on the real conditions of human life.
So when you were working with teachers, were they initially receptive to philosophy? They're being trained now to do it with their kids in the classroom. How did that go?
I would say that it was a hard sell. It was an easy sell in terms of what we were offering. We were offering graduate credits and on-site training.
Essentially free money in large quantities, because that's lane shift for these guys, right?
And there were many teachers that were signing up for the course that had no intention, I think, of ever pursuing it after they got their credits and so forth. But there was always a few that really took to it and saw it as a new and a new way to deal with their classes, especially in the sense of getting away from the usual lecture format, engaging children in discussion. I would say perhaps a tenth, maybe, of the teachers that I was training continued to use the program after they'd gotten their credits.
So you were doing, let's see, it was something like a weekly seminar with these guys, right?
Right.
And it was it over a year?
It was over a year period, school year.
And these folks were then using philosophy in their classrooms how often?
Well, our requirement, at least on paper, was 2¼ hours a week that they were to implement the program with children.
You say on paper, you think that they may have fudged that.
I think they fudged it, sure. I think some of them did. I think others were better at maintaining the requirements because they were getting graduate credits. Part of the graduate credits were for implementation. Part were for attending the workshop, the weekly 2-hour workshop.
Now, I remember that one of Matt's brilliant strokes was to do a whole bunch of pre and post testing rather early on. So was there a research enterprise going on with the students in the program where you were training the teachers with pre and post testing and control groups and that whole business?
Yes, that was done under the direction of a person at Educational Testing Service in Princeton, ETS. And that was ongoing for at least 4 or 5 years when I first started with the program in 1978.
So essentially this was a sort of dual thing where you were both training teachers and establishing the credentials of Lippmann's materials. Were you using mostly Harry, or was it exclusively Harry those first years?
First couple of years, I guess, was just Harry, and although we did have that middle school program, Lisa, we weren't, as I remember, we weren't really testing at that level at that time. Later, Pixie, the 3rd and 4th grade program, became part of the testing. I think the idea was that, or at least Matt thought, that it was the logic in Harry that would show up best in the test results. And at that time we were using the New Jersey test of reasoning skills, which was pretty much key to the logic in Harry. So Harry was the program that was mostly used in the early stages of testing.
So what kinds of things came up with teachers? and what kinds of issues came up as you worked with teachers in those early years? You had just Harry. Maybe 90% of the people there because they wanted graduate credit, and 10% there with a real enthusiasm and commitment to continuing.
Well, carrying the testing a little bit further, I always emphasize, because we did get some really fine results at first. We were getting something like 66% over control in reading comprehension, and
wow.
33% in mathematics. So I know that I was emphasizing that with teachers, with the idea that they would be impressed.
Yeah, well, that is better impress them. If that doesn't impress them, they don't belong in the profession.
But I think that was with mixed results. I think if I were doing it again, I'd shut up about that.
Yeah.
I would just go ahead and get them doing the program and see how it went.
Right.
There was another test that they're using other things. ETS created a, what do you call it, a creativity test. It was called the uses test. And for example, what can you use a coat hanger for? Yeah. And there was no particular set of responses, but how creative could kids be? And well, for example, in affluent communities, districts, you always got mobiles. Mobiles is an example of using coat hangers. And in Newark, you could get responses like, well, you could use it to strangle your teacher. Which, in a sense, is just as creative
Yes.
as the mobile.
Yeah.
So this array of tests, I think at first I was pushing that. I was trying to get teachers to see that they could get results from their kids that they didn't expect to get.
Now, I remember that. I mean, one of the things Matt emphasized in training when I went through was that, you just don't talk much about what you're doing. Just read the story, ask people what's worth talking about, write stuff on the board and start doing it. Nothing that you can say is going to be as powerful as that ultimately, or as helpful as that. I thought that was another kind of master stroke in his general kind of approach to teaching. Do you have a sense of, in the classes you taught in those early days of your work, what the mix was of actually doing exercises and talking about the program, talking about issues that came up with the students, that kind of thing?
Well, from the beginning, I tried to emphasize the idea of children's stories that we use as having a place for a beginning. That children like stories. Then if you try to elicit from them what they find interesting in the story, and if you actually put those responses, say, on the chalkboard, letting the children know that you're taking them seriously, they become a format for discussion. And if you get into exercises, if you get into discussion plans out of this huge manual that was created for the teacher, it's only step by step working out of the children's interests. responses that this takes place. Then the exercises, discussion plans, and puzzles and games were created to further enhance the responses of the kids, their interests, and to build on them. And of course, we felt, and we think this was the case, that this was the source of the kinds of you know, test results that we were getting, the good test results that we were getting, was due to this. By the way, we also, on standardized tests, we were getting statistically significant results.
Yeah, the test results have always been amazing. So how were the kids liking this? What was your sense of how New Jersey kids were responding to philosophy for children the first time it was being offered?
Well, what I found was that over a period of years, I could go into a classroom and I could tell within a very few minutes whether these kids had been exposed to the program before. Especially after we've got 2 or 3 of the programs going at various levels. So if I happen to go into a class, let's say, of 4th graders, and they had had Pixie the year before, I would know just by the kinds of responses I was getting from them, the children, that they had had the program before. So, yes, what was it that I was seeing? It seemed to me that I was seeing as the children became more at ease with a dialogical format. They became more open to discussion, that they didn't hesitate to say, well, I agree with Sally, but I disagree with Ben, or something of that sort, so that you got the real idea of thinking through dialogue. And I saw that taking place with the children, that they became increasingly more verbal. The kids that always have their hand up, whether they have anything worthwhile to say or not, become more reticent as they get into dialogue. And the kids that never talk at all, hardly, become more open. So I see 2 things happening here. I see the kids themselves becoming more able to discuss, and I can also see them being able to challenge one another and not feel like they were being too directive.
Gee. Well, let's see. Those early days, that was the Rockefeller Foundation money that was making the teacher training stuff.
Yeah, we had the Rockefeller. Yeah.
So there was quite a lot of fair-sized grant money flowing into.
Well, we had the Schumann too.
I see.
The Schumann Foundation was very instrumental in keeping the program going in those early days. Rockefeller, yes.
I see. So there was grant money that was essentially paying your salary, that was paying for this really astonishing amount of graduate credit these teachers were getting for doing the program. So you had really pretty generous funding at that point to both test out the program and to get it established in some schools.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how long were you associated with any particular school? I mean, were you hanging with the school for years, or were you moving around, or how did that work?
Yeah, there are a few schools that year after year that I would be going back to, especially in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. There are a number of schools in the Ironbound district of Newark where I would come back year after year. My one disappointment, of course, was that I was seeing lots and lots of classes. I've been in more classes than in any elementary teacher or secondary teacher, but I never had one that I could say was my own.
Yeah.
That I could just work with, say, for a year. Probably if I did it over again, I would try to work that out so I could just do that on just have a class of my own.
Yeah, it was very helpful for me to be, I don't know that it was actually helpful for philosophy for children in Minnesota, but it was very helpful for me as I sort of found my feet with this stuff to be working primarily with kids and having the teacher contact through the classroom, talking about what was happening in the classroom when I did it.
Sure.
Problem was, of course, that if you do it that way, the teachers are quite willing to let that kind of continue.
Oh, sure, they love it.
It becomes scary, the thought of them actually picking it up.
They can leave the room even.
Right. Well, that I never let happen, or very rarely. I was scared. I wasn't able to handle discipline.
I know.
So in this period, you're working with classroom teachers, doing some demos in the actual classrooms with kids. What was how close were your relations with the Institute? I mean, were you officed here? Were you working closely with Matt? Or was it a more distanced relationship?
Well, I had an office here in the Institute, and somewhere in that time frame, we started working with the government, Department of Education, the National Diffusion Network, and that meant even more time in the office in the sense of trying to locate the various state managers of the NDN, National Diffusion Network. I was pretty much on my own. I mean, there was a sense in which I knew what I had to do as far as training teachers in the workshops, and those workshops would start when school was out, so by 3:30 we were in the school. We never had workshops in those days here in the Institute or on campus at Montclair State. They were always in the school districts.
Now, as somebody who's been involved in the teacher training business about as long as anybody but Matt, I guess I'm interested in asking you kind of how you're thinking about philosophy for children and teacher training and the whole business has changed over the years, or developed over the years. I mean, I know Matt's thinking developed, and the different kind of emphases came into his explanations of what he was about and what philosophy for children's kind of center was. But what changed for you as you worked in this, year after year?
Well, I think initially I was very much taken by the kinds of results that they were getting either on standardized tests or on New Jersey test of reasoning skills. I think over the years, though, I became much more interested in the affective, the emotional growth and interests of kids. When you see a good class where they're really doing philosophy for children, the teacher has some feel for it, you also see other things taking place. I mean, you see relationships among the group improving. You see kids looking and talking to one another in a more adventurous way. They leave the class talking about the things that they had been discussing.
Yes.
And this to me became more and more the what I felt were the real important products of philosophy for children. Yes, I still thought that the fact that if you're going to try to get your program into a district, you've got to show the superintendent that there's something that they will think is important. So test results were helpful in that sense. But ultimately, I don't think that's what the program is. I think it has much more bearing on the affective growth of kids. So they become more reasonable, they become kinder, they become more caring. These are the things, it seems to me, that the program promotes and makes it an important improvement in curriculum development in anywhere you use it.
So it's partly what one might call character education and partly something like education for a sane community.
Well, character education in the sense that you're not trying to create some particular person or type person, but character education in the sense that the kids start to think for themselves. They're more open to discussion. They see the world in a I think a broader and a more inclusive way. They become interested in one another and or even in the world around them in a way. I think that sometimes the particularization of the curriculum kind of defeats. There's a more wholeness or oneness or something of their community effort that makes it more open to a growth in character.
Did you find that were the teachers noticing this? Were the teachers reporting that the classroom relationships had changed?
Yeah, we had a what did they call it? I can't remember the name of it, but it was a survey that you would give the teachers that they thought you were asking them about the children. Really, it was a test of the teachers themselves, how they would perceive the kids pre and post. You'd give the same test, and yeah, we were seeing the teachers were becoming much more. How should I put it? They would look at their class with a more loving, caring sense, instead of the class being the enemy to be overcome and so forth. Because there's a great emphasis in the program on communal dialogue. where the teacher is you know, there, and the teacher is implementing and getting discussion going, but then the teacher can kind of sit back and let things go, and that makes it good for everybody. It's no longer the teacher in confrontation with the class.
So the teacher gets to see the class in a new, because they can be to some extent out of the action.
Yeah.
They get to see what the strengths of the class are.
That's right. That's right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Gee. In as many years as you've done this teacher training, Phil, you must have some favorite moments, some favorite teachers, some favorite classes. Anything you want to tell about it? I suppose somebody's going to get offended, but remember, this is likely to get buried in the archives, and by the time somebody digs it out, all the participants are going to be long gone. But.
Well, they say that you remember things at the first and things at the end and nothing in the middle. I do remember when I first started with the program, and I'm pretty sure it was in Union City, New Jersey. Union City is one of those cities that is always on the move. Lots of immigrants come in there. They stay just long enough so that they can get a good job and move out. So you have this steady flow of people. And I remember being in a classroom. It was Harry Stottlemyre's discovery. And in those days we only had Harry, and so we were using it even in the 3rd grade. One of the exercises early in the manual, and this teacher was on that exercise, and there was a question, when does water not put out a fire? Something like that. Now the teacher asked that question, and one of the kids went into a very elaborate way of showing how the water wouldn't put out the fire. You'd get a cigar box and you'd get a birthday candle. You burn a little wax and then put the candle in the box, the cigar box, and light it, and then put the lid over, and then submerge the whole thing in the bathtub full of water, and it would be burning underwater. Of course, when the oxygen is gone, it won't. But the kid had tried to think through and how to come to terms with the problem, and the only response the teachers can get, who can give me a better answer? Now, obviously the teacher had some probably an acetylene torch or something like that you use underwater. And it stuck with me. And over the years, it seemed to illustrate all too often the classroom attitude of many teachers that have a preconceived way of expecting answers. And here you have a very ingenious kid that comes up with a really nice attempt to answer the question, and is put down. And I suppose maybe one of the reasons I remember, because I remember similar episodes from my own class time when I was in the 4th and 5th grade. Always afraid that if you answer and you get the wrong answer, then you're going to be put down.
Yeah. And so it's, philosophy for children is sort of a way of going back and making that right kind of after the fact a little bit, and repairing some of those injustices that get done because people aren't flexible enough to see what kids' thinking really amounts.
Well, I don't always blame the teacher. Teachers have a tremendous job, and when you present a program like this that is so open and dialogical and accepting of various responses, it's hard. It's hard for a teacher that's been trained in looking for and actually having a lot of pressure to get through so many units of a whatever it may be, topic in an X amount of time. So I don't always blame the teacher, but it also shows something about the way education is geared towards kind of a mechanical set of responses, getting the right answer.
Yeah, and philosophy for children has been trying to throw a weight on the other side of the teeter-totter for that, for try to keep that from dominating the world. This, let's get every child running at the same speed in the same direction towards the same, bunch of jobs. I guess I'm interested a little bit in looking back. I mean, you were there in the days when there was a lot of money, relatively, and this was new and fresh and about the best idea anybody'd come up with in a while. You've gotten to see the whole development over the last 30 years in the United States, and being married to Anne, you've got you have a connection to the really explosive growth abroad. I guess I'm interested in your reflections on the state of philosophy for children in the United States now. What you think about that, looking back over this now, almost 30 years of history.
Well, I think that's always been a hard sell in the United States. In Europe and in Latin America, there's a tradition of philosophy in the schools. That tradition is not philosophy for children as we know it, but at least that philosophy was not taken to be something foreign to the classroom. Well, I'll give you an example. This was a superintendent in California, one of the affluent communities in California, and I'd sent some material to him because they had a curriculum coordinator in the school district that wanted the superintendent to see this, something about philosophy for children. And I got a curt little letter back from him. He says, well, you've got a program with a catchy name. It ought to be able to do something. But it's not the kind of thing that we're interested in here. I wasn't actually trying to sell him. I was doing something that someone in his district wanted me to do. And I think this is kind of the way that a lot of administrators over the years have looked at philosophy for children. Unless they take the trouble to see not only the results, but perhaps even see a classroom where it's being used effectively. There's a sense in which American education hasn't changed that much in its attitude towards this program. It's still hard to get it into schools. And I don't think where you have a situation where there's not any great pressure to change. And if you've got enough money and you've got enough things going, you don't want to change, because change always gets you into a precarious situation. Anything could happen. Something terrible could happen if you change, or if you encourage this kind of program. So I don't see a great deal of change in the 30 years in American education.
So
and you know, the emphasis now on accountability, testing, I don't think is the answer. No child left behind is fine, I suppose, at that level of you know, it's a nice idea. But if all you mean by that is that you're just going to keep testing kids to see if they've come up to some preconceived level of expectation, then it's just business as usual as far as I can see.
So the revolution that I expect Matt was hoping would happen in American education, the incarnation of Dewey in American education, didn't really happen.
Well, for one thing, I don't think there'll be change until you change the way teachers are prepared. And that's not going to happen overnight, and even over a period of 30 years. I mean, schools of education have interests in preserving themselves, and why should they change as long as no one is particularly challenging them? It's pre-service has to take place in a new way for there to be a change through the system.
And how successful do you think Philosophy for Children has been at reaching education departments and influencing, at getting Philosophy for Children in as at least optional courses in education departments, and getting the spirit of it established there?
Well, of course, we have a program here at Montclair State, a graduate program in education. I don't think it's been very successful at other places. I don't see any great demand from our interest in other schools of education throughout the nation, and changing their way of preparing teachers that would incorporate something from Philosophy for Children.
Are those doors you personally have tried to knock on? I mean, has there been pressure from the Institute side to go to the schools of education?
I may be corrected. I don't know, in the last couple of years with new administration here, how much they're doing in terms of pre-service, except in our own program.
Nice. So in your understanding, it hasn't been over the history of Philosophy for Children, it hasn't been a priority of the Institute to address pre-service education. The emphasis has been more on teachers in service and adjusting.
Well, there was a teacher in Saskatchewan, a man named Wees, W-E-E-S, I think. He wrote a little book called "You Can't Teach Anyone Anything." He knew nothing about Philosophy for Children, but anybody reading that book, and this is a man that had taught in the schools for 30 years. But anybody reading that book would see that his propedeutic, I mean his idea for change, almost exactly paralleled what we would have seen with philosophy for children if we could have gotten it into pre-service situations. I mean, the book just says this is what we need. Well, I don't think that book's in print, and I don't know that it made much of an impression, even though you had an experienced teacher of many years calling to task his profession.
I remember my old teacher, my first teacher, Arnie Holtz, Minnesota, saying, "You don't change people. 30 years of teaching, I've seen one person change. That was a fat girl who got thin."
Well,
So you don't make teachers either. So you find teachers. Can't train them. And the fundamental thing isn't to train them at all, but to kind of, you find people who are people, and they'll be teachers. If they're good people, they'll be teachers. He wasn't beloved of his colleagues at McAllister for a lot of years, but I think he was on that wavelength too. I have a feeling that the guys who are on that wavelength tend to be the old bears in the departments. Mm-hmm. The ones that everybody kind of tiptoes around, and they have their own messy office in the basement, and everybody just waits them out, and then they hire somebody who's really good with PowerPoint or overhead projectors or something as soon as they retire. Well, thank you so much for your for this picture of how the teacher training enterprise went when it was first beginning. Really important stuff to have on record, and especially, the reflections about how it felt in that time. Thanks again.
Sure.